June 13, 1944, 7 days after D-Day. The Norman hedgerows still smoldered from the invasion's fury, thick with the stench of cordite and burning metal. In the village of Villers-Bocage, British tank crews huddled around their Cromwells and standard Shermans. SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann had carved through an entire armored column like a scythe through wheat, his Tigers 88mm gun punching through British armor as if it were paper. The mathematics of terror were simple. A Tiger could destroy a Sherman at 2,000 yards. A Sherman's 75mm gun could barely scratch a Tiger's frontal armor at 500. But standing among those frightened crews was something different. A Sherman that didn't look quite right. Its turret was taller, ungainly. Its gun barrel stretched impossibly long, 17 feet of rifled steel that looked absurd mounted on the medium tank's hull. British tankers had nicknamed it the Firefly, though some called it the Frankenstein tank, a mongrel creation born from desperation and British engineering ingenuity. The Germans called it something else when they learned to recognize it. They called it the Widowmaker. What Hitler and his panzer generals didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined as they watched Tigers dominate the battlefield in those early summer weeks, was that this awkward hybrid would break the myth of German armored invincibility. Within months, the tank they dismissed as a desperate improvisation would become the most feared Allied weapon on the Western Front. The story begins not in triumph, but in humiliation. North Africa, 1942. British tank crews were dying in their Crusaders and Valentines, outgunned and outmatched by German panzers. When American Lend-Lease Shermans arrived, they offered hope, better armor, better reliability, better ergonomics than anything Britain had produced. But hope died quickly in the desert sun. The Sherman's 75mm gun, adequate against Panzer III's and early Panzer IV's, bounced harmlessly off the frontal armor of Tigers and Panthers. British tankers developed a grim ritual. When facing German heavy tanks, they would fire smoke rounds and retreat. Fighting was suicide. Major George Brighty of the Royal Artillery watched this carnage with growing fury. A gunnery officer, not a tank man, Brighty understood ballistics better than most. He knew Britain possessed the weapon to change everything. The 17-pounder anti-tank gun. This weapon, firing a 17-pound armor-piercing projectile at 3,000 feet per second, could penetrate 140 millimeters of armor at 1,000 yards, enough to kill any German tank from the front. The problem was mobility. As a towed gun, the 17-pounder required a crew of 7, took minutes to set up, and couldn't reposition quickly in fluid tank battles. Brighty's solution was obvious to him, insane to everyone else. Put the 17-pounder in a tank. The British had tried mounting it in their own Cromwell tanks. The recoil was too violent, the turret ring too small, the entire project abandoned as impossible. But Brighty wasn't thinking about British tanks. He was thinking about the Sherman. The American tank's turret was larger, its chassis more robust, its manufacturing simpler. In late 1943, Brighty and a team of engineers at the Royal Ordnance Factory in Woolwich began the most important weapons modification of the war. What they created looked wrong from every angle. The 17-pounder was massive, its breech so large that the Sherman's turret could barely contain it. The radio had to be moved from the turret to the hull, forcing the loader and gunner to work in cramped, awkward positions. The gun's barrel extended so far forward that crews worried it would bend or break over rough terrain. W.G.K. Duncan, the Ministry of Supply engineer overseeing the project, later wrote, "Every tanker who saw the prototype said the same thing. It can't possibly work. The recoil will destroy the turret. The gun will tear itself apart. The crew will go deaf from the muzzle blast in that confined space."
But on February 6, 1944, at the Loworth Proving Grounds, The first production Firefly fired its 17-pounder gun in anger. The target was a captured Panther tank at 800 yards. The first round punched through the Panther's frontal armor, through the engine compartment, and exited through the rear. The second round, fired at 1,200 yards, did the same. At 1,500 yards, still the same. The engineers stood in stunned silence. They had created a weapon that could kill Tigers and Panthers at ranges where those monsters couldn't even see the threat. But production was agonizingly slow. The 17-pounder's barrel required precision manufacturing that Britain's war-strained factories struggled to provide. By D-Day, only 342 Fireflies had been built, enough to equip just one per troop of 4 tanks in British and Canadian armored regiments. This scarcity would define the Firefly's tactical use. Each troop received 3 standard Shermans with 75mm guns and 1 Firefly with the 17-pounder. The Firefly crews were ordered to engage German heavy tanks first and exclusively, hanging back while standard Shermans dealt with infantry and light vehicles. German intelligence initially failed to recognize the threat. In their June 1944 briefings, Fireflies were listed as Sherman variant, gun type unknown, presumed 75mm or 76mm. The distinctive long barrel was noted, but misidentified. German tank commanders, accustomed to Sherman guns bouncing harmlessly off their armor, approached every Sherman with the same contemptuous confidence. That confidence died in the Norman bocage. The hedgerows of Normandy were a tanker's nightmare. Narrow lanes hemmed by ancient earthen walls, topped with dense vegetation, perfect ambush country where visibility rarely exceeded 100 yards. Tigers and Panthers, with their superior range and armor, lost their advantage in this claustrophobic landscape. Fireflies thrived in it. Lieutenant John Gorman of the 2nd Northamptonshire Yeomanry was commanding a Firefly near the village of Hotot on June 15, 1944, when his gunner, Trooper Joe Eakins, spotted movement through a gap in the hedgerow. Tiger, 800 yards. Gorman's crew had never engaged a Tiger. They'd trained on captured Panzer IVs, fired at range targets, but this was different. Through the periscope, Gorman could see the massive German tank traversing its turret, searching for targets, unaware that death was waiting in the shadows. Fire when ready. Eakins' first round struck the Tiger's turret side, exactly where the armor was thinnest. The German tank shuddered, smoke pouring from its hatches. Its engine revved once, died, and it rolled to a stop. No one emerged. 5 seconds from first shot to kill. The entire action took place in near silence, except for the 17-pounder's earth-shaking crack. German tankers in nearby positions didn't even realize what had happened. They'd heard a single shot, saw one Tiger die, but couldn't identify the source. This would become the Firefly's signature. Ghost kills from positions German tank commanders didn't know existed, from ranges they thought impossible for Allied tanks. The psychological effect was devastating. German crews could no longer trust that their armor would protect them. Every Sherman became a potential threat. By late June, German intelligence had identified the Firefly as priority target. Orders went out to all panzer units. The long-barreled Sherman must be destroyed first, before it can fire. German tank commanders were instructed to identify Fireflies by their extended gun barrels and engage them immediately, even if it meant ignoring closer threats. British crews responded with camouflage and deception. They painted the muzzle brakes of their 17-pounders to disguise the distinctive profile. Some crews welded false barrel extensions to standard Shermans, creating dummy Fireflies to draw German fire. Others cut foliage and attached it to the long barrel, breaking up its distinctive silhouette. But the German focus on Fireflies revealed the truth of their threat. When the enemy reorganizes their entire tactical doctrine around destroying a single weapon variant, that weapon has become strategically decisive. The vindication came at Villers-Bocage. After Whitman's rampage on June 13th, British commanders knew they needed to eliminate the Tiger race before he could savage another column. Intelligence placed Whitman's Tiger near the town square, positioned to ambush any British advance. On the afternoon of June 13th, a troop of Shermans from the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry entered Villers-Bocage with orders to locate and destroy the Tiger. 3 standard Shermans, 1 Firefly.
The Firefly commander was Lieutenant Bill Cotton, a veteran of North Africa who'd watched too many friends die to tigers. His gunner was Trooper Joe Eakins, the same man who'd killed his first tiger 2 days earlier. The 4 tanks moved through the rubble-strewn streets in staggered formation, standard procedure for urban combat. The Firefly hung back, its long guns scanning side streets and windows, searching for the distinctive angular profile of a tiger. Historical accounts of what happened next have been debated for decades. What's certain is this: Wittmann's Tiger was hit by a 17-pounder round while positioned near the town square. The shot struck the Tiger's thinner side armor, penetrated into the fighting compartment, and detonated the ammunition stored inside. The Tiger exploded with such violence that its turret was blown clear off the hull, landing 20 feet away. Michael Wittmann and his entire crew died instantly. British after-action reports credit the kill to Joe Eakins' Firefly firing from a concealed position 200 yards away. German records note that a rocket-firing Typhoon was operating in the area. Some historians argue the kill belongs to anti-tank guns from the British infantry. The truth may never be fully known, but this is certain. After Villers-Bocage, the myth of Tiger invincibility died. German tankers no longer approached Shermans with casual confidence. They knew 1 in 4 might be a Firefly, and that Firefly could kill them before they even knew it was there. The psychological shift was immediate. Hauptmann Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, wrote in his diary, "Our Tigers are being destroyed by American tanks. This should be impossible. Intelligence says it's a British modification, a longer gun. Our men are terrified of it. They call it the Langrohr Sherman, long barrel Sherman, and when they see one, they withdraw if possible." By August 1944, Firefly production had increased to nearly 2,000 units. Every British and Canadian armored regiment received their full allocation, 1 per troop, with some units requesting additional Fireflies for specialized tank hunting platoons. The Americans, meanwhile, refused the Firefly entirely. U.S. Army Ordnance tested the design and rejected it for American use. The rationale was complex. American doctrine favored the 76mm Sherman, which offered better all-around performance against medium tanks and infantry. The 17-pounder was seen as too specialized, too difficult to maintain, its ammunition too incompatible with U.S. supply chains. This decision would cost American lives in the battles ahead. Operation Market Garden, September 1944. British tanks pushed toward Arnhem, racing to relieve the surrounded paratroopers. At the village of Oosterbeek, Lieutenant John Gorman's Firefly troop encountered German armor in force. 4 Fireflies versus 8 Panthers. In conventional tank combat, this should have been a German victory. Panthers were faster, better armored, more heavily gunned than standard Shermans. But Fireflies weren't standard Shermans. The engagement lasted 9 minutes. Gorman's troop destroyed 6 Panthers, damaged 2 more, and suffered no losses. German survivors reported that they had been unable to identify the British tanks as threats until the first Panther exploded. The 17-pounder's long-range accuracy meant British tanks could engage from positions where German tankers couldn't acquire clear targets. But Market Garden failed regardless. The paratroopers at Arnhem were surrounded, overwhelmed, destroyed. Fireflies couldn't change the fundamental strategic errors of the operation. They could only exact a terrible price from the Germans who blocked the way. The Ardennes, December 1944. Hitler's last great gamble,
the winter offensive through the frozen forests of Belgium. German panzer divisions, spearheaded by Tigers and King Tigers, smashed through the American lines, creating panic and chaos. The U.S. Army, equipped entirely with 75 and 76 mm Shermans, found themselves outgunned. American tank destroyers, lightly armored open-topped M10s and M18s, were effective but vulnerable. What the Americans needed were Fireflies. What they had were British reserves. The 29th Armored Brigade, equipped with Fireflies and Cromwells, was rushed south to plug the gaps in American lines. Near the town of Sells, Fireflies of the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment engaged a concentration of Panthers and Tigers, attempting to capture a vital road junction.
Lieutenant Colonel James Eady, commanding the 3rd RTR, positioned his Fireflies in hull-down positions along a ridgeline, invisible to the advancing Germans. He waited until the Panzers were at 800 yards, close enough to guarantee kills, far enough to prevent German return fire from being effective. All units, fire at will. 17 Fireflies opened fire simultaneously. The German column staggered as if struck by an invisible wall. Panthers exploded, Tigers ground to smoking halts, half-tracks and support vehicles burst into flames. German tank commanders, accustomed to American Shermans that couldn't penetrate their armor at this range, suddenly found themselves under accurate, devastating fire from weapons they couldn't identify. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. 15 German tanks destroyed, 4 more disabled. The 3rd RTR lost 2 Fireflies to German long-range fire, but the road junction held. Major Otto Riemer, commanding the German forces at Selles, later wrote, "We believed we were fighting American tanks. Their guns couldn't hurt us at range. Then our lead elements simply disintegrated. The British had arrived with their devil guns." By January 1945, as the Ardennes offensive collapsed, German tank crews had developed a Pavlovian response to the sight of long-barreled Shermans. Engage or withdraw, never assume you have the advantage. The final vindication came at the Rhine crossings, March 1945. The Allies stood at Germany's last natural barrier, preparing to cross into the fatherland itself. German forces, their backs to the wall, concentrated every remaining panzer for a final defensive stand. At the Weasel crossing, British armor pushed across the river under heavy German fire. Tigers and King Tigers, positioned in prepared defensive positions, commanded the eastern approach. In conventional warfare, crossing a defended river against heavy tanks should have been suicidal. But the first wave across included 24 Fireflies from the 7th Armored Division. They crossed on pontoon bridges under smoke cover, emerged into German fire, and immediately engaged the waiting panzers. The battle was point-blank, brutal, a knife fight between armored giants. But the Fireflies had one critical advantage. They could kill Tigers from the front. The 17-pounder's armor-piercing discarding sabot round, a tungsten penetrator in a light casing, could punch through 200 millimeters of armor at 1,000 yards. King Tigers, the heaviest tanks Germany ever produced, had frontal armor between 150 millimeters and 180 millimeters thick. Fireflies could kill them head-on. German tank commanders found themselves in the impossible position of engaging enemies who could destroy them at ranges where they couldn't guarantee kills in return. The defensive positions that should have been impregnable became death traps. By March 28th, the Rhine was breached. German armored resistance collapsed. In the final weeks of the war, Fireflies hunted the last German heavy tanks through the ruins of German cities. Joe Eakins, the gunner who'd killed his first Tiger at Villers-Bocage, would finish the war with the destruction of 3 Tigers and multiple Panthers credited to his gun. When asked after the war what he thought gave the Firefly its edge, Eakins' answer was simple: "The Germans never expected us to fight back." For years, German panzers had dominated every battlefield, their superiority taken for granted. Tigers and Panthers were invincible unless attacked by overwhelming numbers or from the sides and rear. German tank commanders had learned to treat Allied medium tanks with contempt. The Firefly shattered that paradigm. Suddenly, any Sherman might be a Firefly, and any Firefly could kill a Tiger from the front at ranges where the Tiger couldn't respond. The psychological effect was as devastating as the physical destruction. German tankers lost their confidence, became cautious, hesitated in situations where aggression might have won the day. By war's end, Fireflies had destroyed more German heavy tanks than any other single Allied armored weapons system. The exact numbers remain debated. British records claim over 500 confirmed heavy tank kills. German records suggest higher losses, but with less clear attribution. What's undeniable is the impact. From June 1944 to May 1945, the Firefly transformed British armored doctrine, invalidated German tactical superiority, and proved that innovation could defeat brute force. The tank Hitler's generals dismissed as a desperate improvisation became the weapon that crushed the Panzer elite. The story of the Firefly is ultimately a story about underestimation. The Germans underestimated British engineering ingenuity. They assumed that because Britain couldn't build a heavy tank, Britain couldn't build a heavy tank killer. They saw the awkward profile, the ungainly proportions, and they laughed. But the British understood something fundamental about warfare. Victory doesn't always go to the strongest or the best armored. Sometimes it goes to those who can adapt fastest, who can turn weaknesses into strengths, who can take what they have and make it enough. The Firefly wasn't elegant. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't the tank anyone wanted to build, but it was the tank the Allies needed. In the rubble of Berlin, among the destroyed German armor littering the streets, investigators found tactical manuals issued to panzer crews in the war's final months.
One section, underlined and annotated in multiple copies, gave explicit instructions for identifying and engaging Fireflies. The long-barrel Sherman variant must be destroyed immediately upon identification, before all other targets, using all available weapons. Do not engage this enemy tank at ranges below 1,200 meters if alternative tactics are available. Do not assume your armor will provide protection. The manual was dated February 1945, 3 months before Germany's surrender. By then, it was too late. The myth of panzer invincibility had died in the Norman hedgerows, killed by a gun that shouldn't have fit in a tank that shouldn't have worked, crewed by men who refused to accept that their enemies were unstoppable. Joe Eakins returned to England after the war, worked as a builder, rarely spoke about his experiences. When asked about killing Michael Wittmann, one of Germany's most decorated tank aces, he would only say, "I did my job. We all did our jobs. The tank did its job. That's all." Lieutenant John Gorman went on to command a full squadron, survived the war without injury, and wrote years later, "The Firefly wasn't the best tank. It was uncomfortable, cramped, difficult to maintain. But when you saw a Tiger through your periscope,
when you knew that monster could kill you from a mile away, you were grateful for every inch of that long barrel. Major George Brighty, the artillery officer who first conceived of mounting the 17-pounder in a Sherman, received no medal, no public recognition. His contribution was classified throughout the war, kept secret even from most Allied commanders. He died in 1978, largely forgotten by history. But the weapon he created changed the course of the war. Without the Firefly, British and Canadian armor would have faced Tigers and Panthers with inadequate weapons, forced to rely on numerical superiority and tactical cunning against enemies who could destroy them with impunity. Losses would have been catastrophic. Advances would have been slower, bloodier, more costly in lives and morale. Instead, the Firefly gave Allied tankers something they'd never had before: a fighting chance. The last Firefly was retired from British service in 1956, ending an 11-year career in which it served in World War II, the Greek Civil War, and various colonial conflicts. Some were sold to other nations, seeing service into the 1960s. A few survive in museums, their long barrels still menacing, still distinctive, still telling the story of the hybrid tank that shouldn't have worked. If you visit the Tank Museum in Bovington, England, you can stand beside a restored Firefly. The placard notes its specifications, its history, its service record. But the statistics don't capture what this machine meant to the men who crewed it. It meant survival. It meant the ability to fight back. It meant that German heavy tanks, those mobile fortresses that had dominated every battlefield since 1942, could be destroyed by courage and accuracy and a gun that barely fit in its turret. The German panzer commanders who encountered Fireflies in those final months of the war all reported the same phenomenon. When they saw that long barrel, that distinctive silhouette, they knew they were in a fight for their lives. The contempt they'd felt for Allied tanks evaporated, replaced by the same fear Allied tankers had felt facing Tigers. That reversal, that moment when the hunter becomes the hunted, encapsulates what the Firefly achieved. It took the most feared weapons in the German arsenal and made them vulnerable. It proved that desperation could breed innovation, that modification could rival original design, that a hybrid cobbled together from two nations' technologies could defeat purpose-built killing machines. Hitler's generals laughed when intelligence reports first described the Firefly. A British gun in an American tank. Impossible, impractical, desperate. But by the time they understood what they were facing, it was too late. The Firefly was already loose in France, hunting tigers in the hedgerows. And behind every hedgerow, in every tree line, at every road junction, German tank commanders had to wonder, is that a standard Sherman, or is it the one with the 17-pounder? That question, that moment of doubt, that hesitation before engaging, that was the Firefly's greatest weapon. Not its armor-piercing rounds or its long-range accuracy, but the fear it created in the minds of men who'd thought themselves invincible. The tank Hitler laughed at had taught the German army to be afraid, and in teaching them fear, it helped crush them. If this story moved you, if it made you remember the ingenuity born from desperation, the courage of tankers who faced impossible odds, subscribe and help us keep their legacy alive.
These aren't just stories of machines. They're stories of the men who crewed them, who trusted their lives to hybrid weapons and improvised solutions, who proved that adaptability can defeat brute force. The Firefly's crews deserved better than to be forgotten. Let's make sure they never are.